Fred, let me start with you. Exactly what more do we know? We've been hearing that it seems these attacks were not coordinated, but again, as I mentioned, they bear similar hallmarks.
They certainly do. You have to keep in mind that there's brilliance and simplicity, and with the call for action by the Islamic State last month, in essence what they've done is sent word out to support what we call here at Stratfor the leaderless resistance, meaning there's not a command and control element at play here. It's to act locally, so those that are sympathizers are carrying out these kinds of attacks in support of the Islamic State call to take action.
John, what do we know about the reaction so far from the U.S. intelligence community?
Well, I think so far it looks like Secretary Chertoff was right in your earlier interview that there's inspiration but not coordination. But what the intelligence community is doing now is looking for any evidence of coordination, going back over huge data banks of emails and online postings and so on to see, first of all, if any of the attackers were in coordination and cooperation with ISIS elements in Syria or Iraq, whether anyone traveled to Syria or Iraq to be trained there, or whether this is simply a matter of people reading IS literature, being frustrated by their situations in France or Tunisia or wherever, and taking it upon themselves to conduct these attacks.
Fred, why today? Why now?
Well, this is an important day with the call for prayer throughout the Middle East, with the call for action by the Islamic State on June 23rd. The intelligence community was expecting some sort of action to take place. To me, the fascinating case was the suicide attack inside the mosque in Kuwait. That appears to be a pretty good-sized bomb inside the mosque, and it takes a good amount of planning to make sure you are capable of cooking off a suicide vest like what we saw. And with the numbers that were killed and injured there, that's a little better planned attack than what we saw elsewhere.
John, speaking of planned attacks in Kuwait, Kuwait has not been the target of attacks for years now. Then all of a sudden this.
Well, the key to that, I think, is probably not the fact that it was Kuwait, but the fact that it was a Shiite mosque. And there have been attacks. Some of them appear to have been initiated by IS elements in both Saudi Arabia and Kuwait against Shiite targets. Because remember, the big fault line, one of the big fault lines in that part of the world is between the two main sects of Islam, Sunni, which is IS, and the Shia, who you find in Iran and Kuwait and Bahrain and parts of Iraq.
Fred, can we take something, can we infer something from the fact that a lot of foreign tourists, they were the targets of these attacks today?
Without a doubt, especially when you look at the shooting on the beach and at the hotel in Tunisia. This is an effort to disrupt the economy of the nation, and it's not a very complicated attack. And I think that's the scary part when you look at what we saw today, meaning it doesn't take a lot of planning, it doesn't take a lot of people. You just need a person with an AK-47 to just walk up and start shooting people. And it's extraordinarily difficult to prevent that from occurring.
John, then I would guess then, you know, continuing on with what Fred said, what was the message that these extremists were sending to the international community?
Well, I think the underlying message is that we are on the move and you can't stop us. And remember also, at the same time these attacks were taking place, IS has been on the move in Syria and Iraq, retaking the town of Kobani. So there are two different kinds of operations going on here. One of them are more or less conventional military operations in the area they've declared as their caliphate. And the other one are these attacks much farther flung, way beyond the borders of the caliphate. And so the underlying message is basically and simply put that we're on the move and you're not able to stop us.
Fred, what message then does it send to Saudi Arabia and some of the other U.S. allies in the region? Will they now be emboldened and joined, if you will, to step up the fight and not perhaps rely on the United States to take the fight to the militants?
Well, it's hard to say. After many years at the State Department and my time here, it's really hard to predict what the tripwires will be to cause additional actions. I do know this. When you're looking at this from an intelligence problem, especially like what we saw in France, there's just simply too many Islamic State sympathizers and supporters for the French security service to surveil, and for that matter, the European service to surveil. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least to see additional similar attacks like we have seen today.
You talk about the surveillance. Does that surveillance, I would imagine, increase because we are trying to find people who might be inside of these groups who can give us adequate information?
Without a doubt. You need that human intelligence or you can never prevent these attacks from occurring. That's always been the Achilles heel. You have to have human assets, you have to have snitches and sources inside these organizations to tell you what they're up to.